What is going on, guys? Rogue TCG here, bringing the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG deck profile. You all voted for it. Here I am providing. Here is Tearlament once more. Now, this month, I want all the decks to kind of like fit into a theme, being like spooky. It's scary seeing your opponent play against this. It's scary seeing this being played against you, you know, all that sort of thing. This deck, I'm going to show you the scary thing about it once we get to it, but you might be able to see. Oh, that's a secret. This deck's a little scary. This is a 60 card deck, very terrifying, very scary to be the opponent sitting across from a 60 card brew because you already know what is happening. But that's enough yapping about the deck profile. Let's get into it. Starting off our deck profile, we are on Tearlament, so we're on triple copies of Tearlament Reinoheart, as well as triple copies of Tearlament Kashtira. Reinoheart on summon allows us to dump a Tearlament from deck to grave, and then Tear Cash allows us to either special it out of hand, and if we do, we get to mill some cards, and then if it's sent to graveyard by a card effect, we get to mill some more cards. So a really good card for both. Reinoheart also allows us to bring it back from graveyard if it is sent to graveyard by a card effect, which all the Tearlaments kind of want to be doing. We're on a copy of Tearlament Merly, Tearlament Sheeran, and Tearlament Havness. Merly on summon, we get to mill 3 cards. Sheeran in hand allows us to pitch a monster from hand, special summon it, and then mill 3. And then Havness is if our opponent activates a monster effect, we can activate it in hand, special summon it, and then mill 3. All 3 of these cards also have the exact same effect when sent to graveyard by a card effect. When they're sent to graveyard by a card effect, we immediately fusion summon using cards from our hand, field, or graveyard, including itself as fusion material. Really great cards, allows us to fusion 3 times per turn whenever we can mill them or send a graveyard by card effect, really enabling this deck to pop off. Speaking of popping off, unfortunately we do not have a Tearlament Kitkallos in the extra deck, so we are playing triple copies of King of the Swamp in order to facilitate those sort of plays. Although in this deck, King of the Swamp also does serve a dual purpose in the deck, and you'll see it in just a little bit. But King of the Swamp is quite good. We're playing 3 copies of King, and then later in the deck, we're going to have 2 copies of Polymerization, so we're able to actually search a card using the King. For our other Tearlament cards, for our spells and traps, we're on triple of Primeval Planet Perliano. It buffs all our fusions and our Tearlaments. Whenever we shuffle a card from graveyard back into deck, we get to pop a card. And then on activation, it gets to search a Tearlament. Really great stuff, and it mentions Vsauce Starfrost. We are on triple copies of Tearlament Sulliek. When this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, this one allows us to add a Tearlament monster from deck to hand. Otherwise, it is just a continuous trap that negates cards by sending cards on our side of the field to the graveyard for a card effect, triggering our own cards along the way. Really powerful stuff. We almost always want to be ending on one of these, or at least one of the other traps. Speaking of the other traps, we're on one Tearlament's Meta Noise. This one's a Book of Moon, but also Foolish Burials. And then if this one's sent to graveyard by a card effect, we can add a Tearlament monster from our graveyard back to our hand. Great for recycling stuff like Tearlament Kashtira or Tearlament Shiren that we can reuse in hand. We're on one copy of Trip of Karma. This card on field, we're never really going to try and utilize it on board, to be completely honest. The main thing is while this card's in the graveyard, we can banish it from our graveyard to add a card that mentions Vsauce Starfrost, which is any of our Tearlament spells or traps, or even the field spell, which is fantastic. So we're playing one copy of that for that reason. We're on 2 copies of Tearlament Scream. It might seem a little suspect, but 2 copies, although we're trying not to really utilize the on-field effect of Scream, more the send to graveyard effect of Scream in order to search out a Tearlament trap. Although the on-field effect, when either our opponent or us special summons a monster or normal summons a monster, when there's a Tearlament monster on field, we get to mill 3 cards, and then our opponent's monsters have their stat reduced for the turn. We're on 2 copies of Tearlament's Grief. This card allows us to special summon a Tearlament out of our deck and then send a card we control that's similar to that monster to the graveyard. Typically, it's just going to be the monster we special summoned out, but in the end, this is just a Tearlament Foolish Burial with an extra step being special summoning the monster. We're on 1 copy of Tearlament Heartbeat. This is our main form of removal in this deck. This deck actually struggles a little bit with back row removal specifically and non-monster effects. In relation to skill drain specifically, this card is a way to stop that. That's it for our Tearlaments. Now let's get on to our supplemental engine. We are on 2 copies of Aluber, the Jester of Despia on normal or special, allowing us to add a branded spell trap from deck to grave. And then if a fusion we control is, I believe, destroyed by battle or leaves the field because an opponent's card effect, in graveyard we can activate it to special summon it from the graveyard and then negate an on-field effect of a monster their opponent controls until end of turn, which a lot of people don't really know that's an effect of Aluber. You're on the rest of our Despias we're on 1 apiece of. We're on 1 Ad Libitum of Despia, 1 Despian Tragedy, and 1 Guiding Quem the Virtuous. Tragedy, when sent to graveyard by a card effect, allows us to add a Despia monster from deck to hand. Ad Libitum, when sent to the graveyard or banished because of an fusion, is being used as a fusion summon, allows us to bring back either a Despia or a fusion monster from our graveyard or banishment. And then Quem on summon allows us to dump a card that mentions Fallen of Albaz, and if a card leaves either extra deck, we can special summon a card that mentions Fallen of Albaz from our graveyard. Cards that mention Fallen of Albaz and Albaz himself are going to be 2 copies of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, 1 copy of the actual Albaz, and 1 copy of the Albion. Now, it might seem a little bit suspect to be only playing 1 copy of the actual Albaz, but keep in mind we are playing 3 additional copies of Albaz and the 3 copies of King of the Swamp. We only really need the 1 Albaz for the 1 copy in deck for Branded Fusion. Another very synergistic card between the Despias, the Albazes, and the Tearlaments is going to be 3 copies of Branded Opening. This card sends a card from our hand to the graveyard for effect to special summon a Despia monster from our deck, and then we're locked into fusions for the rest of the turn. And then if this card's in our graveyard and a fusion would be destroyed by card effect, we can banish this card from our graveyard instead. Very nice replacement effect, and once we get to our one of the cards in the deck, you'll be realizing why we have so many great graveyard effects. I mean, if it's not obvious, it'll be very obvious soon enough. But this card will also trigger our Tearlaments. Any of our Tearlament cards that discard for effect, this does that, so this will trigger everything. The 1 copy of Branded Fusion we are allowed to play, kind of self-explanatory. And then for branded spells and traps that we're also playing 1 of, other than Fusion, 1 copy of Branded in Red, 1 copy of Branded in High Spirits, and then 1 copy of Branded in Retribution. High Spirits also allows us to discard cards for card effect. This one will also allow us to send a card from our extra deck to the graveyard. Primarily it's going to be Tearlament or Kitkallos, because that is an aqua that we can use in order to search cards. So, really great card there, and Kitkallos just so happens to fit the Branded in High Spirits requirement. We're in a very, very small Bestial package. We can side in a little bit more Bestials, or we can cut some cards in order to fit the Bestials in. However, this is what I'm comfortable with. We're on 1 Bestial Lubellion and 1 Bestial Saronir. The 2 best for, the all-gas build, in my opinion. And then cards that Lubellion can grab, we have 1 copy of Branded Lost, since we're a fusion-centric archetype, and 1 copy of Branded Regained to get a continuous advantage with our Saronir specifically. And because we are planning on banishing some of our cards, this will allow us to recycle that and to get draws out of it. For our generic power spells, we are on 3 copies of Fusion Deployment. We are on a fusion-specific deck. We have specifically Tearlament, Reinoheart, and Fallen of Albaz, and Blazing Cartesia we are all able to fetch out of our deck with this card, so we are playing 3 of it. We are on 3 copies of Triple Tactic Thrust, and then the 1 card, the one, the only, That Grass Looks Greener. We want to mill. If you get to resolve this card against your opponent, they will shit. They will shit their pants on the spot. That is a guarantee. If they see 20 cards leave the top of your deck, you are probably winning that game, because almost all of those 20 cards is going to have some sort of trigger effect in the graveyard or beneficial use case. So the main point of this deck is you kind of want to go second with it, to be honest, because you have so much gas. You can just kind of push through whatever you want, and then once they negate everything that's real you have, you go activate Thrust, grab Grass, Windmill Slam that Grass onto the board, and then you mill 20, and you gamble. You know how it is, you gotta gamble. And then another Tactics Thrust target being Tactics Talents. For more consistency cards, we're on 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. This can send Trivic Karma as well as any of our Tearlament spells or traps, allowing us to find specific things that we need in order to start comboing off, as well as 1 copy of the normal Foolish Burial, just to, dump our Tearlaments to get guaranteed fusions, to dump our Tragedy in order to search for a Despia, so on and so forth. We're on the 2 aforementioned copies of Polymerization. This card is good for adding off of King of the Swamp, guaranteeing we will always have one in deck to grab one off King of the Swamp, as well as we are playing Guardian Chimera, so this is also beneficial for that card. And then lastly, you did happen to see one very early off in the video. We are on Keldo and Mudora, since we are planning on milling a lot and discarding cards out of our hand for card effect and the related such, and just getting cards in graveyard in general. These 2 are very powerful cards in order to interrupt our opponent's game plan, or even do something as trivial as triggering our own field spell by shuffling our own cards back into deck, just to pop a card our opponent controls if we have the field spell up. So these cards are incredible, and if your deck can play them, like it's a Tearlament related deck, something along that line, I would highly recommend that you do play them because they are just so strong. But that's it for the main deck. A nice solid 60 cards, the maximum we can play. Now let's get on to the extra. The extra deck, I'm going to have formatted it in a very interesting way. It's going to go Tearlament related cards, and then the cards of the other archetype that the Tearlaments can fuse into. And then finally, we're going to end off with cards that the Tearlaments cannot fuse into. So for the cards that the Tearlaments can fuse into, we're on 1 copy of Tearlament Kitkallos, 1 copy of Tearlament Reinoheart, and 1 copy of Predaplant Dragostepelia. These are the cards that the Tearlaments are kind of meant to be fusing into. Kitkallos being a special summon negate, kind of like DDD Wave High King Caesar, but only once. Reinoheart allows us to shuffle cards back into the deck when it's summoned, as well as when a card is sent from our deck or hand or whatever to the graveyard, like an Aqua monster, I believe. And then if this card is sent to graveyard, we can send an Aqua from our deck to the graveyard to special summon it, or rather a Tearlament card specifically to special summon it, and then we can trigger that on summon effect to shuffle something back, which is great. And then we're on 1 copy of Dragostepelia. We're almost always going to be able to make it. Level modulation and effect negation is very powerful. That's it for the stuff that our Tearlaments are really going to be making a lot of the time. Now onto the cards our Tearlaments can make. We're on 1 Grongignol, the Dusk Dragon, allowing us to dump cards from either our main or our extra, whenever we see fit, to be completely honest. 1 Masquerade, the Tax Dragon, in order to make our opponent's lives a living hell. 1 copy of Despian Proskinian. This card's actually, I keep on talking about it because I like it a lot, but I think this card is quite interesting, specifically in the Yubel matchup, because if you go into this and they're doing their Yubel combo, they want to have Yama in their graveyard so they can banish it to reborn something. But we can use Proskinian to steal their Yama right out of their graveyard, or even something as powerful as their Unchained Soul of Rage, so they can't link off anymore. Which is very interesting dynamic that this card brings to the table, but this card is another card that our Tearlaments are allowing us to fuse into, as well as a copy of Despian Queritus, because they're very open-ended on their fusion requirement. We are on 2 copies of Lubellion, the Searing Dragon, because these cards require Dark, and then these are the last of the cards that we can actually make with our Tearlament monsters. But Lubellion just allows us to get an extra fusion by using cards from our field, graveyard, and banishment as material. And then the cards that our Tearlaments unfortunately cannot fuse into. We're on 2 copies of Albion, the Branded Dragon. I apologize, I'm a little bit under the weather. We are on 1 copy of Titaniclad, the Ash Dragon, and 2 copies of Mirror Jade, the Iceblade Dragon. And then finally, I did mention it earlier, our last card is going to be Guardian Chimera, to pair with either the Polymerizations or the Branded in red. But that's going to be about it for the deck profile. Please let me know how spooked you are on a spook meter from 1 to 17.5. But that's going to be about it for the deck. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for my 1 member, Ari. Thank you. If you want to become a member, I would recommend staying to the end portion of the videos. I always mention what being a member entails and what benefits you get access to. But again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the spooky month, and I'll be seeing you all later. Bye-bye. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you wanted to talk to more Yu-Gi-Oh players like yourself, I would highly recommend checking out our Discord server. Link is going to be in the description, as well as the QR code on screen. we do talk somewhat frequently about Yu-Gi-Oh! And the current meta, so I would really enjoy to see you there. As well as we do recently now have channel memberships available on our YouTube channel, where we have 3 different tiers. We have Super Supporter at $2 a month, where you get loyalty badges, emojis, guaranteed comment responses, a shout out at the end of every video, as well as access to the members only Discord channel, where you get early sneak peeks at future videos. There is the Giga Supporter at $5 a month, where you have early access to all new videos about a day or two before they go up, as well as all the previous offers. And for $15 a month, we do have our final tier, which is going to be Femboy Fanatic. You get a guaranteed customized video every single month, as well as 1 hour of my time. Could be for anything you'd like. You want a duel? Absolutely. You want me to help build a deck? Absolutely. You want to play some Helldivers? Sure. I'll do anything for an hour once a month. But supporting does help me out quite a lot, and it does help me produce all of these videos. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be seeing y'all later. Bye bye.